Welcome everyone to our webinar today. Today we'll be talking about preserving the Sonoran Desert and bird habitat through invasive plant management. I am pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Tony Figueroa, who is our invasive plant management coordinator here at Tucson Audubon. Tony has been working with invasive plants since 2018 and has been working at Tucson Audubon since 2019. So we're really lucky to have him here and to share his expertise with us about kind of the bigger picture issues at hand, as well as what you all can do on a more micro level to help preserve our Sonoran Desert and our bird habitat. I'm also pleased to have Karen Howe with us here today. Karen is a volunteer of Tucson Audubon. She wears many hats, including as one of our volunteer field trip leaders. She also works extensively with our Habitat at Home program and has a fabulous habitat at her own home where she has implemented many of these invasive plant strategies. So she will be speaking towards the end of the presentation to share her own personal experiences on implementing these strategies at home. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over first to Tony, and then we'll take some questions, and then we'll go to Karen. So Tony, you're up.
All right, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone, and welcome. Well, as you all heard, we're going to be talking about preserving the Sonoran Desert and bird habitat through invasive plant management. So, very important topic at my heart. Tucson, born and raised, native to the region. I have watched the desert landscape change before my eyes at the local community level and then also out on the trails. And I had a major change of what I wanted to do with my life as a result of it. I wanted to stop working in a retail setting and get out and do something on the landscape, and feel like I'm working towards a bigger mission than just some sort of small business exchange that happens. So enough about me and this sort of work. Sorry, let me get my screens to work. So just our team here has grown over the years. As we said, we started in 2019. There were 3 of us then. Started primarily working on federal lands, and then we've gained the attention of other community members and government organizations. We've now got contracts with Pima County, working with HOAs, working with other non-government organizations, as well as federal land managers. So there is a connectedness between all land units, and we are trying to fill that gap of managing in between and at all of these places instead of just, managing the one land unit that, say, the National Park Service manages, but can't manage beyond those areas. The species spread throughout the region, and we're spreading with them to make sure we can combat them and rein them in wherever possible, and minimize the impact that they're having on our critical areas. And, if some of you are in this meeting and you're like, what the heck, why are we talking about plants? I thought we care about birds. This is the Tucson Audubon. Well, you're in the right place. We are going to be talking about birds, and like all things on this planet, plants are where it all starts. If we don't have plants, we're not going to have food to supply everything up in the food chain. And some plants are a little bit more valuable than others in this area, and that's why you hear them talked about all the time. So this picture has 4 of our charismatic birds from our region, some a little bit more common than others, but you can see that there is one common organism in these photos, and it's the saguaro. So the saguaro, one of our keystone species, provides habitat or home and shelter for 15 bird species at least in the Sonoran Desert. And, whether it's providing a little nest cavity for raising your young or the delicious fruit that are falling to the ground right now as we speak, getting ready for the monsoon. It has a whole host of bird species, other rodents and insects that use this, and it is vital to the success of our ecosystem. So it's a keystone species. If you're not familiar with that term, that's an organism that plays a vital role in the success of the overall ecosystem. And for the Sonoran Desert, the saguaro is that species. But we have a real problem on our hands here. The Sonoran Desert is currently being invaded by many introduced non-native species. These are causing severe negative ecological effects on the habitats that are, the favorite of many of the bird species that we all like to go out and look at. This is a scene from the foothills of the Rincon Mountains, actually off of Tanque Ridge in Saguaro National Park. And this area is supposed to be primarily bedrock with really shallow sandy soils, small amounts of desert shrubs, cacti here and there, a lot of saguaros, but very minimal small grass is what this landscape is supposed to look like. Now it's been invaded over the decades with buffelgrass, and it has created a continuous patchwork of plants touching one another through this whole picture, from the foreground to the far distant. If there was a lightning strike in this area, instead of just burning one plant and being done, it's going to burn that plant, catch on to the next one, and spread through the whole region. So I'm sure all of you have probably heard of the threats of fire and buffelgrass, but there's a reason why you've heard about it. The threat is real, and it's one of the biggest concerns that buffelgrass presents to our area. Beyond that, you can see how thick it is and how it's just overgrowing all other species. As it continues to grow and grow, it's going to suppress the other species that are used by our native birds and insects. So if all of the insects that used to use one specific species no longer have that food item, then the birds that eat those insects are no longer going to have their food item. So it's just this cascading effect that occurs. The more we deplete our habitat, the less suitable it is for the animals that use it, and they are going to stop returning to use it, or they might just die off at the site because they don't have the resources required. But there's good news. Tucson Audubon is here. We've acknowledged that this is a major fight, and we've taken up the challenge. And these are some photos of the crews working around the state. Upper left, we're removing arundo along the shores of the Colorado River in Havasu National Wildlife Refuge. In the center top, we're removing fountain grass that's spreading through a community in the Tucson area. On the upper right-hand side, this is actually Jamin inside of a stand of chain fruit choyas, just this amazing forest of chain fruit choyas that had an extensive buffelgrass infestation at its base. And a lot of the times people talk about saguaros and the threat of fire, but all of the other species of the Sonoran Desert are equally at risk of fire, including choyas. Maybe you don't have a high regard for choyas, but you know who does? Cactus wrens. Cactus wrens loves choyas. Curve-bill thrashers also love choyas. Making nests inside of these prickly things that no other mammals want to try and climb into and eat your babies. It's a perfect sort of apartment living that our birds want. So if fire comes through this area and wipes out that stand of chain fruit cholla, it's equally destructive to those groups of birds that depend on that species of cactus, as it is the 15 species that depend on the saguaro. So it's not just a saguaro conversation, it is the whole community. Community is a big focus of this talk and a lot of the things we do. It's never just one issue, it's many things working together. But as we continue through this photo set, bottom left, crews working along the roadsides at Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge. Bottom center, we're doing vegetation surveys to see what plants are growing in areas where we are doing vegetation management and finding out what plants are being used by animals. Specifically here at Buenos Aires, it's the mass bobwhite that they are focused on trying to create habitat that's suitable for them. And finally, bottom right, removing tumbleweed or Russian thistle at Chiricahua National Monument. So we do a variety of different management techniques and a variety of landscapes, and they all have their own little importance to them, but it's all about preserving critical habitat so our wildlife and our native plants are able to thrive and survive there. So final picture of some of our work in action. This is in the Tucson Mountains near Star Pass. Big time project, removing trees that are invasive, also doing grass management of buffelgrass. But in the left picture, you can see this overgrown, messy sort of jungle area that we were in. And over time, eventually we get to the bottom right and we've cleared out a lot of the non-native trees and the undergrowth and really opened up a small drainage in the Tucson Mountains that was once a point source for many non-natives. So through a lot of work, you can make a significant change. Just takes action. So all of our actions are carried out with this guiding principle of integrated pest management in mind. Integrated pest management, just to summarize the idea, is about a combination of management principles to address an issue. The same plan of attack doesn't always work for every situation is the short and sweet of it. So using what's going to be the best tool for that situation and adapting when you realize maybe we should change our plan of attack because this isn't working. You know, you can't just put that square into a round hole. You have to adjust. So just kind of breeze through a little bit of this, but we're trying to get to the meat and the potatoes of this. I'm sure many of you have seen plant identification guides, or there are resources on how do you identify species. We want to talk about why is it important? Why should we care? Is it really a big concern? How can we do anything about it that will make a difference? So these are all common questions that I hear, and I've come up with some answers for them. Why should I care? Well, because this is your home and you should take pride in it, maintaining its appearance just as if it's your own house. You see something out of place in your house, more often than not, you're going to take action to correct that. When you're seeing invasive species just moving into your neighborhood, you know, you have the power. You can take action, do something about it. Is it really a concern? One of the questions. Yes, fire risk is one of the ultimate concerns. But beyond that, there's things like decrease in habitat suitability, decrease in the number of insects that are using an area, If you decrease those insects, that means you have a decrease in pollinators. If you have a decrease in pollinators, then you probably have a decrease in the food available for the birds that might eat those insects, or the lizards that eat those insects, and the birds that eat those lizards. So it's just this huge interconnected web. And if you just let the invasion occur and watch your diversity decrease in your yard and in your neighborhood, you know, one day you're going to wake up and be like, what happened to the Sonoran Desert? I thought that I used to live in a desert. Now I live in the Serengeti. You know, there's certain areas of this town or just vacant lots where development was about to occur and then stopped, that have just been sources of great disturbance and allowed buffelgrass to just fill in, and now they are just waist high grasslands. And at the moment, they're all completely dried and just ready for a gigantic fire. So the action needs to happen. How can I make a difference? Start. You have to start somewhere. Pull one plant, pull many, educate people about the plants that you know. You know, maybe you don't have the energy to go out and do manual removal of plants anymore, but you have a nephew or a grandson or granddaughter that wants to go out and do something. Give them a chore, have them start removing these plants. You know, start interacting with your community members. You can really build community out of this type of work. You know, if you have a small infestation at your home and you know that some of your other neighbors do, you know, team up, work on it together. Working on things like this can really build community, and Karen Howe has, you know, really been a great example of this by collaborating with people in her community and bringing people together to understand why should we take action on this. So just a little bit of interaction can really go a long way. So put this photo up because it kind of demonstrates where saguaros start. Here on the right-hand side, maybe a 2 to 5 year old saguaro. And then the saguaro on the left-hand side that this northern flicker is calling from, you know, it's somewhere 100 to 175 years old because it's got an arm on it. So you're talking about 170 years of time potentially between the saguaro on the right and the saguaro on the left. 170 years is a really long time and a lot longer than I have on this earth. So if we don't take the action now to protect the habitat that this little saguaro is growing in on the right, it's never going to have the chance to make it to be the age that's suitable for this northern flicker to live in it. If this little saguaro gets surrounded by a sea of buffelgrass that in 20 years catches fire and kills it, never made it. Just lived 25 years to get burned down by a buffelgrass fire. So the threat is real. These plants are slow growing, but the spread of invasives, they are certainly anything but slow growing. So that is the battle that's at hand. Here's a little sizing chart because it's one of the most common questions I ever receive is how old is that saguaro? You can look at it over there. How old is it? Got a little bit better understanding of how old those saguaros are now looking at this chart. So again, 5 years for that little baby one, and then somewhere between 100 and 175 years for one with arms on it that has cavity nests in it. You know, just a long time, and this is why the threat of fire is real. And here's photos. So this is the Mercer fire. It's the first recorded true buffelgrass fire in the Tucson area in the Catalina Mountains. So it was a 25-acre patch of buffelgrass. They got hit by a lightning strike before monsoon season, so it was very dry conditions, and that 25-acre patch burnt itself out completely. Now, if you stand at the intersection of Snyder and Catalina Highway and you look to the north, it's just a little bit east of Bear Canyon, you can see one patch on the hillside, and it's a different sort of color than the rest of the hillside, and that's because it's all buffelgrass that has filled back in on that area. So after the fire, the Sonoran Desert Museum went up and surveyed the area. Kim Franklin took some pictures of the site and monitored its progress through time. You can see right after the fire, ground's completely charred. Many of the saguaros are completely charred, likely the ones that have burn scars all the way to the top of them will die. Some of them will survive, but this is post-fire. Who wants to play the betting game of what the first thing that's going to grow back is? You guessed it, it's buffelgrass. So a little bit of a thought experiment here, but you have a bunch of saguaros that have just died or are in the state of dying from that fire. You have a new flush of buffelgrass growing in, which is already flowering, you can see in this image. So they're about to set more seed and just infest this area even more. But think about the time scale that we were just talking about, from a little baby saguaro to getting to that mature saguaro. If you have this positive feedback loop of this fire cycle in this area, it's wiped out the mature saguaros. Beyond that, it's wiped out some of the palo verdes. Palo verdes are also equally sensitive to fire damage. Palo verde operates as a nurse tree for a lot of the saguaros. You're losing all of the things that get you to a baby saguaro having a successful life. So if you don't have those things in place and all you have is this field of buffelgrass, the likelihood of ever getting that fully mature saguaro is next to nil, because this buffelgrass is more likely to burn over the next 70 years before that saguaro reaches maturity then it's just going to burn it out and kill it before it gets to that mature state. So it's that positive feedback loop for the grass and a negative feedback loop for the Sonoran Desert native plants. But we've all probably heard this story before. It's a real sad story. Birds like this, purple martin on the upper left-hand side, they depend on these really old, well-aged saguaros to make cavity nests in. So far, that's the only thing that we're finding them nesting in. So if they lose all of these large saguaros, where are they going to go? Where's the Gila woodpecker going to go? These are species that depend on this organism to survive. And if grass wipes it out, where are they going? We need to do something about it. But now we're going to do a little bit of a turn face and focus on another common grass in this area. Buffelgrass gets a lot of the press, but it has an equally destructive cousin that is spreading throughout the Tucson Basin and throughout a lot of communities with a lot greater ease and under disguise of being an ornamental plant. And that species that we're talking about is fountain grass. So buffelgrass is getting all the bad press. Its cousin, fountain grass, deserves just as much bad press. It is far more common in our riparian areas, on the edges of roadsides. And if you ever go up Mount Lemon Highway towards Molino Basin, you will see plenty of fountain grass growing along the entire route. One of the great concerns that this grass presents more so, or in a different sort of way than buffelgrass, is how heavily it will invade riparian areas. So we talked about saguaros being a keystone species for our birds in the area, but the riparian habitats are critical habitat for 90% of the bird species that go through the Sonoran Desert. So it is a must that things go to the riparian zone. That is where the water flows. That's where water pools. So that's where things go in the desert. Water is life. Unfortunately, fountain grass will invade these areas with much higher densities than most of the native species. This is just around the neighborhood. This is a common sight, and this is the type of thing that you can take action on. You know, if you have this small population growing in your neighborhood, work with your neighbor. Take action, remove this, because it's only going to continue to spread, and it will infest this entire yard if you give it enough time. One other thing that I want to draw attention to in this picture is this fountain grass is surrounded around a utility box. This is the most common point source for infestations that I see within communities, neighborhoods, at someone's house. If you're wondering, do I have invasive species spreading on my property? Best place to start, go to the utility box. Utility workers go from one box to another, you know, in all sorts of weather conditions. One day they drive through the mud, they pick up the seeds, they drive to the next utility box, and it spreads. Seen it time and time again. Utility boxes, #1 point source in communities for invasive plants. So right down the street from that house in the previous image, it's a little wash. And guess who's showing up there? It's the fountain grass. These pictures were taken on the same exact day also. So you can see how dried out they are away from the water source, but just being in that little bit of a riparian path, they're really greening up, they're healthy, they're happy, and they're expanding in numbers. So if this goes unchecked, and I've seen it far too many times, it will just conquer this entire riparian area and can end up being something that looks like this. This was shoulder high for hundreds and hundreds of yards walking through this wash, and just absolutely outcompeting everything that grows along the wash bottoms. Also made it incredibly difficult to walk through this wash because you can't even see the boulders you're trying to step on because it's growing so tall. And it's also a good hiding habitat for more than a few rattlesnakes that I've encountered in my life. So fountain grass is a big problem in the Tucson Basin, and it's a species that has gotten neglected because people view it as an ornamental. The red fountain grass, the crimson fountain grass, is still sold ornamentally. They say it's sterile, but I say give it another 20 years and it'll prove us wrong. I just believe in planting a native plant. If you want some big showy grass like this, there are many options to be planted, such as deer grass. If you want to look into planting the right thing in your yard, we have a whole Habitat at Home program here at the Tucson Audubon that can help guide you on choosing the right plants to put in your yard, and that will create your own habitat and bring in the birds. So we work hand in hand. Habitat at Home restores the plants that you want to have at your home, and the invasive plant program comes in and gets rid of the plants that you don't want to be growing there. It's really a great teamwork and has a bright future working together. So this is the type of situation that's happening in an HOA or in a neighborhood near you. This is an infestation of fountain grass, drying out, becoming high density, been neglected for far too long. And unfortunately, it creates a ladder fuel. If this fountain grass catches on fire, it has a canopy of trees above it, just like most riparian habitats do. So if there is some sort of fire that occurs and you go back to a spot like this, it's going to carry all the way through that riparian area. And we all know how long it can be dry in the fall and in the springtime. These areas are green in these photos, but there's often times where they are just tinder boxes of shoulder high dead grasses waiting to catch on fire. And, you know, if it's in a riparian area and it's a magnificent bird habitat, that's loss of all the birds and all their homes. These are actually people's homes right here, including the bird habitat. So it's a double whammy. Not only losing valuable wash habitat, but you're losing your home habitat and, you know, all the costs that comes with that. So things can be done. It's not easy, and oftentimes involves a lot of sweat, but the effort is well worth it when you see the results in the end. This is a section of wild horse drainage in Saguaro National Park. On the left-hand side, fountain grass, right-hand side, after the removal of fountain grass. It's a lot of work, and it takes repeat treatments, follow-ups, making sure you don't have any seedlings that mature and set new seeds. It's never just a one and done with any project, but you can see that if you have enough dedicated people, you can make a difference. The scene on the left, you know, when you walk onto it, it's like, oh man, this is overwhelming. I can't do anything about this. But scene on the right, end of the day, probably 4 or 5 people working that day to make all this change. So it's not quick, certainly, but you can do it. And it just takes that time and effort and a commitment to say, I'm going to do this. So those are our 2 main grasses that we're concerned with at this moment. And part of the reason why we're talking about this is these 2 grasses primarily grow during the rainy seasons, which are the winter, if the drought ever stops, but most typically it's the monsoon season. Monsoon, no matter how bad our drought has still been pretty consistent with supplying us with the moisture needed to get these grasses to grow. And that's what presents part of the challenges, making the decision of how do I manage this one way or the other, using those integrated pest management principles. So the very first thing you need to do is identify the species. What am I dealing with? Is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? In a year like last summer where there was just so much rain and so much growth, it's hard to tell what was native and what was non-native, because even some of the native plants were growing to such a gigantic size, you've never seen it like that before. But knowing how to identify the species is your first step. If you need help, there's plenty of resources out there. Take a picture, send it to me, send it to the U of A Cooperative Extension. There's lots of great apps out there like iNaturalist. Take a picture, post it to the internet, and then somebody will tell you what you have. There's really a lot of options that are at our disposal nowadays in terms of trying to figure out what the species is. So once you know what your species is, maybe you have buffelgrass, maybe you have fountain grass, assess it. Is this something that I'd be able to manage by myself? If not, who do I turn to? Well, the Tucson Audubon is a great place to start, in my opinion. We can come out there and help you make those management decisions also, and then you could hire us to treat it if it's a large enough population and that's your desires. Another part of that decision is, how do you want to treat it? Do you want to do manual removal, or do you want to do herbicide spraying? I understand the hesitation that a lot of people have with herbicide, and rightfully so. It's a chemical, you need to respect it. It's a weapon that has the potential to kill things. Anything that has the potential to kill things needs to be respected, and you need to use the ultimate amount of safety while handling it or applying it. So because of that, all of our herbicide applicators are certified with the Department of Agriculture, and we focus on doing everything possible to maintain the highest level of safety, and also, again, focusing back on plant identification, we strive to be treating just the target species and minimizing any sort of collateral damage that's occurring. So making that decision is usually a decision based on how do you feel about herbicide versus manual removal, and then ultimately it's cost. A very expensive activity, regardless of its manual or its herbicide spraying. But if you are managing a 1 acre property or several acre property, you have to start somewhere. If you have an infestation occurring on your property, ignoring it is only going to allow it to get bigger and become more expensive. None of these treatments are silver bullets. Any sort of treatment that occurs requires follow-up, several years of follow-up, often 3 to 5 years. If you have a big, long-standing population that has dropped numerous amounts of seed, the seeds are viable for up to 5 years, according to studies that were carried out at Figueroa National Park. So no matter what you do, you need to keep following up, checking that area, because if you neglect it and something grows and drops new seed, you have a new population and another 5-year wait window that you have to go through of doing follow-up monitoring and maintenance. So what's one of the best things to do? Collaborate with your community, because if you're managing your property and your neighbor's not managing theirs because they don't know that there's something to be concerned about, well, their property is probably going to continue to infest yours. So it's all about teaming up. We're in it together. Humanity did this to the Sonoran Desert. We brought these plants here. We need to try and take our best steps to manage it and mitigate its impacts on the Sonoran Desert. So just to kind of dive in a little bit deeper to the herbicide versus manual removal decision, pros and cons. If you're doing manual removal, it's very slow, it's expensive, requires a lot of people. One of the great concerns that is often overlooked is the soil disturbance that occurs with it. And these plants specifically love sites that have soil disturbance. So that's why they really grow well in areas where there's been fresh construction, edges of the roads, anywhere where there's landslides or rock falls. The seeds really do well germinating in freshly disturbed soils. So sometimes you'll see it's just the edge of the roadside where you have that infestation, and then out in the well-maintained, healthy creosote forest flats, you don't see that many plants invading because it's still that healthy, intact soil. When you do that manual removal, especially if you're on a slope before the monsoon season, you are increasing the chance for some erosion and disturbance. So you need to plan accordingly and consider the areas where you're removing if it has erosion threats. The benefit of it is you've immediately cleaned up the area. You've revealed some of the plants that were hiding underneath this giant population, and you can really see a before and after that's just spectacular. Some of the downsides of it also, there's a lot of seeds that are being knocked about when you're manually removing something. Seeds are falling on that disturbance site that you've just created, and it's kind of that self-fulfilling cycle that it creates. So you still have to continue to follow up with checking on new growth occurring at that site, and takes a lot of time, bending over, back power. So takes time, but it's effective. Herbicide, there is a specific timing requirement with herbicide use. You can't just use it all year round. The plants must be green and growing in order to be receptive to herbicide treatments. When you apply glyphosate, the primary ingredient of Roundup, the plant has to be actively growing and green in order to take in the chemical, send it to its roots, and systemically kill it. If you spray a plant that's tan and dried out, you're just wasting chemical, putting chemical out into the environment that doesn't need to be there, and you're wasting everybody's time. So knowing when to spray is very important, and being honest about whether or not a treatment plan would be successful is another thing that's a must. You can't just tell people, oh yeah, if you spray it, it's going to take care of it. It's not true. There's plenty of people that are willing to tell you that, but it's not going to be effective. So making sure that people are aware of the physiological requirements of the plants they're treating in order for the chemical to be effective is a must. It's also a challenge of you can't spray if it's raining, and you have to wait for the rainy season for it to spray. So it can make for some challenging timing on planning. And if you do happen to spray and then you get a big monsoon storm later in the afternoon, you'll often have decreased efficacy in the results of that treatment because it got washed off. And then just the obvious, working with chemicals requires extra caution and safety and cleanliness, and you're working with a weapon, so treat it with respect. But the bottom line between both of these management processes is they both require follow-ups. Neither one of them is perfect, and they often should be used hand in hand and alternate between them when necessary. So that's it for the predefined talk that I have. And I just want to take this time to call everybody out here. We're all concerned citizens. We're community members. We obviously care about birds, otherwise we wouldn't be at a Tucson Audubon virtual presentation. but the birds depend on us, and the desert depends on us. We brought these plants here, and we all need to work together to stop their spread and impact. So do what you can. You can volunteer, you can donate, you can educate friends and family, whatever you can do in your power to spread the word and to help minimize the impact and spread of invasive species. It's all I can ask for, and I hope that you can turn around and go inspire others and just inspire change. So I like to end all of my talks with this quote because I think it summarizes this type of work really well. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you all for listening. I see that there are plenty of things in the chat. So now we will open it up and talk through some of these questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was just so informative. Thank you for your expertise and sharing that with us today. I know it's very much a sobering presentation. There are a lot of challenges ahead, but thank you that you're here to help guide us, and thank you for everyone who's joining us. This is already step one of taking action, is coming on this webinar today and then learning what the situation is and how best to take action. So let's definitely work through some of the questions that have already come in, and then we're going to take some time to hear from Karen Howe, one of our volunteers who has lived this, has helped to remove invasives from her own property. We're going to hear about her experiences as well. So I don't know, Tony, do you just want to go through and pick out some questions, or do you want to do that?
Sure, I can go through. Looks like Suzanne had the first one asking about info sheets on the destructive nature of fountain grass and other ornamentals. The destructive nature, I don't necessarily have info sheets on them specifically. But if you're looking for a list of some of the common invasive species, I can probably provide that for you to share with your neighbors. If Suzanne wants to chime in, unmute yourself and clarify your question at all, if you desire, feel free.
Well, yeah,
You're muted, Suzanne.
destructive may not have been the best choice of words, but the reasons why people would want to plant it, the deleterious effects it has on the environment, the native plant.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of what I talked about, just the degradation of the habitat, how it just outcompetes everything, and then once it eventually becomes a ladder fuel for fire within its plant community. But I can certainly work on creating something for you on that. If you want to send me an email, we can certainly talk through it also.
And just FYI, I think some of the brochures that Tony shared with me for my HOA, there's some really good ones. And then I created some supplemental materials that were very specific to the type of plants in my community. And I distributed them to everybody in my HOA. So it was a little bit more like, what problems do we have here? What do I do about them? And of course, filled with, get Audubon's help. That's the number one thing, get help from Audubon, because they can help with that. But I also have some things that when Kirsten shares this, I've got videos that I took of Audubon staff in my neighborhood. I've got brochures. I've got an article. I've got a lot of additional things that might help people who are like me, like I'm just starting kind of a thing.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Karen. Yeah, and we will have those resources available for everyone after the talk as well. So stay tuned for those. Okay, so moving on, TC asked the question of how much of the root is to be taken out when pulling fountain grass?
So I just shared a little PDF that's a plant this, not that option. So feel free to thumb through that and give you some ideas. But sorry, repeat that last question you just had.
So I'll actually combine it with another question. So the first question is, how much of the root do you need to remove? And then a related question is how to dispose of them. Will they reroot if you just send them to a landfill, for instance?
Yeah. So when you have a buffelgrass, usually if this is the soil level, right underneath it, there's these growing nodules that are usually about an inch or two deep. And they look like little onions would probably be the best way to describe them. And those are the rerooting nodules. So just a little ecological context for the evolution of the plant. It evolved in Africa under heavy fire and grazing pressure. So animals come through, eat it to the ground, those little nodules persist, regrows. Fire comes through, those little nodules right underneath the ground, clears out the biomass, opens it up, it regrows. Underneath those nodules, you'll have the little like spaghetti string roots. Those spaghetti string roots aren't capable of reestablishing the plant. It's just those little onion bulb looking root nodules that must be removed. If you leave one in the ground, it's going to establish itself. If you remove a plant, it's like a foot in diameter and you miss one nodule on the far corner because it's buried under some dirt, you might have spent 10 minutes removing that plant and it's going to come right back because you missed that one nodule. So that's another one of the challenges with manual removal is you have to be very meticulous in looking for those little nodules and making sure the area is clear of them. Otherwise, it'll come right back. Once you have that plant out, and say you have the whole plant out and you can see all the nodules underneath it, as long as it's out of the ground, it's not going to reestablish itself. It's usually going to dry out and die before the day is over. One of the most common techniques that was established at Saguaro National Park was thatching the plants together. So when you remove some of these huge patches, you end up with so much biomass that there's no way to haul it out without spreading the seed. So if my hand is the flowers of the plant, you just kind of like bend it in half so that the flowers are then pressed against the stem and lay it down so that the seeds are hidden from the sun, and kind of thatch it in a way that all of the seed and the flowering material is towards the center of the pile. So you create this gigantic death pile of buffelgrass, and that way, if there's a breeze that comes by, the seeds are trapped down underneath the thatching of the buffelgrass bodies. And you'll grab a rock or a branch and lay it on top of that pile so that it can just decay there on site over the next year or so, and then eventually disappear. But using that technique in large infestations has had very good success. And then again, you got to follow up, because there will be some seeds that are able to germinate out of there. And out of a death pile where you have thousands of them, you're inevitably going to have a few seedlings pop up, but treat them with ease and move on to your next batch.
All right, thank you so much, Tony. So I'm gonna turn it over to Karen to talk about her experiences with removing these grasses and any advice she has on starting out in this journey.
Thanks. I'll make this brief, and I'm very willing to have others here contact me afterwards. So I'll say the number one advice: get Audubon's help. Two parts. So I am a member of Habitat at Homes. I'd say number one, if you're just thinking about your own property, and I was fairly new to Tucson last year, bought a house, And I got immediately to Habitat at Home, and Carrie Hackney came to my house. And when you're doing a native habitat, one of the first things is get rid of invasives. And I had a lot of grasses, all kinds, and she helped me. Like, those you want to worry about, those are okay. It was fantastic. And I learned some other things, like African sumac. I had 2 big African sumacs, which look like trees. Like, those are a problem. They're now gone. So I started there with getting some help. And then I said, like, I could dig all these grasses myself because I don't have that big of an issue. I had mostly fountain grass, very little buffelgrass. And I did that, and it was a slow go, but I did it for a while. And then I'm in an HOA that's about 50 properties. It's North Hills. It's the yards are about an acre. Now, at our HOA in March, somebody said, what are you going to do about buffelgrass? And everybody started arguing and yelling and like, we tried that and we gave up and we didn't know what to do and nobody does anything. And I was just like, I'm new here, like, I'll figure out what we can do. And it's amazing. So I called Tony, and he's absolutely fantastic. His team is fantastic. Since April, I've got over 60% of my HOA doing something about the invasive grasses in my neighborhood. Audubon's been out 4 times, and I got a campaign going. I'm the crazy grass lady in my neighborhood. People see me, but they come up to me and they were like, we just didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to start. And so Tony came and I paid him, but it was more than worth it. And we had an educational forum for the neighbors. They came, I recorded it, and they came and they helped. This is what you can do. And then I used data. So I'll just say I was transparent and I used data. I sent out a lot of data and assumed if anybody wasn't doing something, it's because they didn't know what or how. And that was generally the truth. And I gave brochures to everybody. I talked to everybody. I called people, both homeowners and people who own empty lots. And they just said, thank you. Now we know what to do. No judgment, no blame. And they are so grateful. I walk down the street and people say, thank you, thank you. And the real interesting thing is some people had previously tried to have their landscape company come, the urban myth. They spent $3,500 getting their landscape company to come and dig out their buffelgrass. Within a year, it was all back. Audubon came, did like the first maybe 11, 12 properties in my neighborhood, treated chemically, controversial, but I got to that. The most expensive house was $125. That was in April. And then now we got converts. So they're like, whoa, that's all. And with some information, I've really got people on board. Happy to share anything that I've done, but I want to leave with a message of like, what is that? Action is the antidote to despair. I'm like, oh, I can't. And fortunately, I have to say, my husband, 30 years today, is like, you can, you can just get people involved, but with good intent and with good data, and get Audubon's help, because absolutely everybody has been just fantastic.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's so helpful. And one thing that you said that really stuck with me was the no judgment part. I think, if we're all intent on going out and kind of converting people to this idea of native plants, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind is be non-judgmental and not assign blame, and just help people see what paths are more effective.
Right. It might not be your fault that you have invasive grasses on your, people are like, I don't want to be assessed. Yeah. And I'm like, it's not your fault. So it's that kind of a thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are just about at 10 or 12 o'clock. But we may have time for 1 or 2 questions for Karen or Tony. If anything else has come up, feel free to unmute yourself or throw a question in the chat if you'd like. Getting a lot of great praise here for Karen in the chat, very much deserved.
It's Audubon, Audubon, Audubon. Tony is amazing. If you get to have him help you, you will be so thrilled. And his staff let me take videos. So I have videos of his staff people removing fountain grass and buffelgrass, showing exactly how to do it. It's easier to see it. So I'll work with Kirsten to help them get post it, and I will try to put everything else on the Habitat at Home Facebook group. I am not Facebook except for Habitat at Home. So that's another source. I'll put stuff up there.
Yeah, we will. I'll make sure to send out a lot of these resources in a follow-up email along with the recording for this webinar. So it looks like maybe we don't have any more questions.
I have a quick one.
Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne. Sorry about that.
Is Habitat at Home only for the Tucson area, or is there a counterpart in Valley? I live in Sun City.
That's a great question, Tony.
It is a Tucson Audubon based program. They might be willing to work with you. I don't know how far they will travel, but it's not.
Oh, Kim's here. Kim is our Habitat at Home manager.
There we go.
The expert.
Probably can't see. I don't know why it's so dark. Anyway, yeah, we absolutely would love to have you in Sun City. We've worked with a couple people in the Phoenix area. So yeah, we can get some specific resources out to you as well for your particular area. So yeah, we'd love to expand further. So yes, please.
That'd be great. I'll be back in touch. I'm out of the state for the summer. I'm in Colorado, but I'll be back in touch when we get back in September.
Beautiful.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kim. That's so exciting.
Of course.
I'll make sure to include Kim's information in the email as well. So if anyone else has any questions about Habitat at Home or how to get involved, she's your gal. Ramona, I saw that you unmuted. Did you also have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering how to identify buffelgrass, because every time we go for a walk, people ask the leader, and there's always some clue how to identify buffelgrass. How do you identify it? How do you know you're looking at it?
Great question, Ramona. Tony or Karen, one of you want to
Let me just pull up a picture that I have on file for it, and I'll share it.
Ugly. That's how you know what it is. It's really ugly.
All right. Can you see my screen now?
Yep, looks
Yes.
All right. So this is the easiest way to identify it when it is in flower. So these are the flowers of buffelgrass. They kind of are a bottle brush is the best way to describe them, and they typically have a purple sort of color to them. They, in terms of what the plant itself looks like, it's starting to grow right now in areas close to roadsides and has a very limey green coloration to it. If you do pull one of the plants, you can see that there is this very fine hair that exists in its armpits, is what we call them. But that's kind of identifying factor to it. But that is getting into the really fine identification of it. If you see something that looks like this, you got buffelgrass. It's very messy, ugly, bottle brush, foxtail, however you want to describe it. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
awesome. Thanks, Tony. That's really helpful. All right, so I think we're just about out of time, a little bit over, so I want to be respectful and let everyone go for the day. But just another huge thank you to Tony for sharing his expertise on invasive plants, and Karen for also coming on and joining and sharing her very hands-on experience with dealing with her own invasion on her property and in her HOA community. So thank you to you both. Thank you so much for everyone for being here and for caring about this issue and for hopefully wanting to take some action, and definitely be in touch with both of these two. I will include their emails in my post email after this, along with some resources so that you can hopefully take some action moving forward. So thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you again at another Tucson Audubon event. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.